The young and the restless spoilers. The clatter of footsteps echoed against the polished metal of the train's vestibule as Audra stepped into the rear cabin, her silhouette momentarily swallowed by the flickering shadows cast by the passing lights. Outside, the French countryside blurred into streaks of dusk and fading elegance, the sun having surrendered its warmth to the encroaching night. Inside the train, the atmosphere was deceptively quiet, the air tinged with expensive cologne, polished champagne glasses, and the subdued hum of casual conversation. But something had shifted. The moment Audra entered, the atmosphere subtly changed, as if the train itself held its breath. She no longer moved like the woman everyone thought they knew. Gone was the sleek corporate advisor, the woman who once clung tightly to Kyle Abbott's arm as a trophy of status and seductive ambition. In her place was a presence colder, more deliberate, and infinitely more dangerous. Even her smile, once a mask of allure and charm, now seemed sculpted from ice, a warning carved into elegance. Victor Newman stood only a few feet away, his seasoned instincts sensing something off. He narrowed his eyes at Audra, but no immediate conclusion came. She looked the same, sounded the same, but something intangible had shifted. Her eyes no longer flickered with the need for validation or ambition. Instead, they bore a glassy, focused stillness that reminded Victor of past adversaries who didn't just play the game, they designed it. And yet, despite the churn of suspicion in his chest, he said nothing. He couldn't. Because deep down, he had feared this very outcome and buried the thought out of necessity, out of denial. Audra had gotten too close, her intel too precise, her instincts too clean, her loyalty too timely. But it wasn't until now, in this sterile silence between her final step and her first word, that the horror of truth finally clicked into place. "I'm no longer pretending," she said, her voice calm but ringing with unmistakable finality. "My name, my alliances, my purpose, all of it, a role in Dumas' grand design." Around her, heads turned. Victoria choked on her drink. Nikki stared in stunned disbelief. Even Nate stiffened, his hand drifting toward his phone, halted only by the glint in Audra's eyes, a nonverbal command not to try anything foolish. Then came the voice. Not hers. But his. A voice that hadn't been heard in person, only in rumors, coded messages, distorted audio files that circulated in hushed networks of political elites and intelligence black holes. Dumas. "Congratulations, Audra," the voice said, bleeding through the speakers of the cabin like smoke seeping through a locked door. "Your mission is complete. You now have my permission to kill anyone you like." The train lurched slightly as gasps rippled through the room. Victor clenched his fists, the weight of his legacy and the threat to his bloodline converging in one spiraling moment of helpless fury. He had suspected Audra's connection to something darker, but her performance. Her meticulous threading of corporate loyalty, her calculated romance with Kyle, her subtle infiltration into every corridor of Newman Enterprises, had been flawless. She had played them all. But what did she want now? Chaos? Revenge? A purge? Audra, unmoved by the collective panic, walked calmly past the stunned guests and disappeared into the locked corridor that led to the control car. Behind that fortified door was the nerve center of Dumas' operation, disguised as the train's navigation room, retrofitted with biometric locks and a dozen monitors feeding her real-time surveillance of every passenger on board. From this command post, she wasn't just an assassin or a saboteur, she was a conductor, orchestrating a masterstroke of psychological warfare that no one had anticipated. Not even Dumas had foreseen how good she would be. Not this good. She sat down in the leather swivel chair and tapped into the encrypted server. The guests were tagged, their facial recognition patterns fed into the system. Each passenger, Victor, Nikki, Victoria, Nate, Billy, Nick, had a profile, a threat level, a psychological vulnerability log. Dumas' genius wasn't just brute force, it was surgical manipulation. And Audra was now the scalpel. Meanwhile, Nick and Billy had retreated to the back of the train, pacing like cornered predators, their instincts on high alert. The revelation of Audra's betrayal had shattered the fragile alliance that barely held Newman family operations together. Billy, always suspicious of the glossy surface beneath which the family's dirty secrets festered, now found himself vindicated, but too late. And Nick, caught between fury and fear, realized that Audra's betrayal wasn't just a strategic misstep. It was a personal collapse. She had once shared his bed. She had once whispered false regrets and gentle promises as she pulled the strings behind his back. Now, she was working for a man who had just given her a license to kill. What the hell does Dumas want? Billy hissed. Is this about revenge? About power? Or are we part of some sick experiment? Nick didn't answer. His mind was racing through every file, every deal, every anomaly that had slipped past his radar. They had all underestimated her. All of them. And now, it might be too late. The plan had never been to just assassinate key players. Dumas was too theatrical for that. No, this was about demonstrating dominance. About turning the elite into prey inside a luxury cage they thought was built for them. The real horror wasn't that they might die. It was that they might turn on each other first. Back in the control room, Audra began rerouting the train's power. The lights dimmed strategically, the HVAC system reduced airflow to specific compartments, and silent alarms were triggered inside the VIP cars. She wasn't going to kill them. Not yet. She was going to make them believe it was coming. She was going to watch them spiral into paranoia, betrayal, fear. That was the directive. Break the body from the inside before the killing even starts. She uploaded the next phase of the protocol, divide and devour. Suddenly, Victor's phone buzzed. A text message appeared from an unknown encrypted number. You should have listened to your doubts. Goodbye, old man. Victor showed no reaction. But Nicky saw his hand tremble slightly as he locked the phone and shoved it into his coat pocket. He had built empires, destroyed enemies, survived affairs, illnesses, even literal explosions. But this was different. This was personal. Audra had been under his nose, feeding information to a ghost who now had the Newman family trapped in a pressure-sealed luxury tomb barreling through the French countryside. In a whisper of silken malice, Audra activated the projector in the lounge cabin. One by one, live feeds of each guest appeared on the screen, accompanied by chilling data. Victor Newman, susceptible to cardiac stress. Victoria Newman, emotionally unstable under prolonged isolation. Nate Hastings, prone to panic under moral crisis. Billy Abbott, combustible under betrayal stressors. The room turned into a mirror of its worst fears. The guests weren't looking at each other, they were looking at targets. But Audra wasn't done. She keyed in one more command: unlock the champagne car. Inside, a gas agent, harmless at first, would be released in small doses. Not enough to kill. But enough to disorient. Enough to provoke hallucinations, aggression, fear. Enough to make them question each other's intentions. If the fear didn't kill them, the suspicion would. Back in the shadows of the rear cabins, Billy found a service hatch. It led underneath the train, a risky passageway that, if accessed, might allow them to reach the control car undetected. But it would be a near-suicidal crawl. We either die in this rolling coffin, he said, or we fight. Nick nodded, his eyes burning with the kind of rage only betrayal can trigger. They were done being pawns. It was time to find Dumas. To stop Audra. Or to die trying. And somewhere, deep within a private compound watching through satellite relay, Dumas sat back and smiled. The game had begun. And Audra had just proven she was the queen he had waited years to awaken. The night crept deeper into the rhythm of the train's relentless motion, but inside the command car, Audra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with fury. Her fingers hovered over the console, motionless for the first time since she'd taken control of the system. She could hear the whispers of chaos beginning to rise through the audio feeds, Victor barking instructions, Nick and Billy crawling through the crawlspaces, guests shouting half-suspicions at one another. But her mind wasn't on them anymore. Not entirely. Something else had surged to the surface. Something older, deeper. Her anger had never been about control or domination alone. It had always lived in the marrow of her bones, twisted in the memories she tried to bury, the humiliations she could never forget, the betrayals that had molded her into the weapon she had become. And now, standing in the silence of the control room, she realized something had changed. She didn't just want revenge for Dumas. She wanted closure for herself. Because behind the sleek wardrobe and icy composure, behind the tactical brilliance and psychological finesse, there was a version of Audra who had once believed in power as a form of protection. But now, with Dumas' voice echoing in her mind and Victor's voice begging for calmness through the intercom, she felt something fraying inside. Years ago, she had stood on the threshold of trust with Victor Newman. He had recruited her, mentored her in private. More than a mentor, perhaps something intimate, something blurred in those late-night strategy sessions, behind locked doors at the top of the Newman Tower. Victor had never publicly claimed Audra as more than a business ally, but the truth was more complicated than either of them dared confess. There had been a moment, brief but electric, when she had thought he saw her not just as an asset, but as a woman of value. He had told her once, in a half-whisper over brandy and power plays, that he admired her survival instinct. That he saw himself in her. That she could be dangerous if she wanted. And then, just like everyone else, he had chosen someone else. He had turned away. And worse, he had sent her into the jaws of Dumas' network under the illusion of trust, expecting her to feed intelligence and return unscathed. But something broke during those months undercover. Not just her faith. Her identity. Dumas hadn't corrupted her. He had awakened her. And now, standing at the intersection of vengeance and grief, she realized she wasn't just angry at Victor for underestimating her, she was angry because he had seen her pain and walked away. He had known something wasn't right. That her loyalty came with wounds. But he never asked. Never cared. And now, he would pay. Outside the control room, Victor and Nikki stood in the dining cabin surrounded by stunned faces and flickering lights. But neither one was speaking to the other. They hadn't for a long time, not about what mattered. For decades, they had built an empire together, shared children, buried secrets, weathered scandals. But beneath that golden surface was a wasteland of buried truths. Nikki knew about Victor's past with Audra. She had known the moment she saw them together. The long glances, the silent acknowledgements, the quiet respect she had never been afforded in her own battles. But she never brought it up. She couldn't. Because Nikki had secrets of her own, dark ones, old ones, that would destroy what little remained of their trust. She had once loved a man during Victor's exile, a man who vanished under suspicious circumstances. She had once been approached by Dumas too, not as a target, but as a potential partner. And though she had declined, she had never told Victor. She couldn't afford the exposure. Their relationship had become a fortress of silence, held together not by honesty but by mutual blackmail. And now, as they stood side by side watching their world crumble in a train filled with enemies and shadows, they knew they could no longer afford to stay quiet, but neither dared to be the first to speak. Audra's voice returned to the speakers, but it was different this time. Less mechanical. Almost intimate. "You built this world on half-truths and power plays," she said, her voice slow and cold. "You taught me to lie, to seduce, to deceive. And now you act surprised that I learned too well." Her tone was not one of gloating, but accusation. Her rage wasn't for the mission, it was personal. Every lie, every glance, every whispered promise had led to this moment, and now the blade hovered over the necks of everyone who had dismissed her. Billy and Nick finally reached the auxiliary hatch beneath the control car. They were drenched in sweat, breathing hard, but adrenaline had burned away any hesitation. Nick especially felt the throb of betrayal twist inside his gut like acid. He had been used by Audra. Slept with her. Defended her. He remembered nights where she cried against his chest, saying nothing, just shaking. He thought she was broken. He thought she needed saving. But now he realized he had been the one manipulated. Or maybe they both had. Maybe the saddest truth was that her pain had been real, but it was also a tool. And now she was wielding it like a blade. They breached the panel and climbed into the rear of the command car. Audra didn't turn. She was watching them on a screen before they ever reached the door. She let them in. She wanted them to see. As they stepped into the icy glow of the surveillance chamber, they saw it all: the live feeds, the gas dispersal plan, the behavioral analysis files. Every fear, every weakness laid bare. And in the center of it all stood Audra, calm and untouchable. But for a moment, she faltered. A flicker crossed her face. Not guilt. Not shame. Just sadness. Nick saw it and hesitated. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Audra didn't answer. Because the answer was everything she had never said. It was the night she was abandoned by her mother. The betrayal by mentors who only used her mind and her body. The moments she was told she was too much, or not enough. The time Victor said he would protect her, and didn't. She stepped aside and let them look. Not because she surrendered. But because the true damage had already been done. The poison had already been injected, not into their bodies, but into their hearts. The fear, the mistrust, the unraveling. That was her masterpiece. Even if they stopped her now, they would never trust each other again. They would never be the same. Back in the dining car, Victor finally turned to Nikki. For the first time in years, he looked like a man uncertain of what to say. Nikki met his gaze, her hands trembling. There was so much between them, and not enough time to say any of it. But one truth hung heavier than the rest. Audra was his legacy too. Not just as a former confidant or lover. But as a warning. That everything he had built, the empire, the alliances, the myths, was made of fragile glass. And now, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. The train sped toward an uncertain horizon, the truth laid bare in every corner. Audra didn't need to pull the trigger. She already had. And the bullet was silence, secrets, and betrayal, left to fester in the hearts of the powerful. Would you like me to continue this into what happens next, perhaps with Victor confronting Dumas face to face? Or a final twist with Audra disappearing again before the train stops? Kyle Abbott stood near the champagne bar at the far end of the opulent train car, oblivious to the subtle but deliberate glances being cast in his direction. He was dressed in a dark tailored tuxedo, his usual easy charm dimmed by the weight of everything collapsing around him. What began as a festive voyage to France for an elite gathering had devolved into chaos. Audra's betrayal, the train under siege by psychological warfare, and the terrifying reality that Victor Newman himself might have known more than he let on. But Kyle was not just haunted by betrayal. He was distracted, emotionally and dangerously so, by the unraveling silence from Claire Newman. His bond with her, a rare spark of stability amid a sea of ambition and corporate masks, was now fraying under the weight of suspicion and misunderstanding. And that was precisely what Audra Charles wanted. Audra's trap had been set long before the train left the station. It was laid not with weapons or explosives, but with emotions, memory, and carefully planted doubts. Kyle had been her greatest asset once, a lover, a business partner, a fool. And though she had walked away from him without remorse, she had never truly let him go. Because she knew, perhaps better than anyone, that Kyle's greatest weakness wasn't power or pride. It was the longing to be seen. And now, she would use that need against him. Earlier that day, as the train wound through the French countryside, a package had arrived for Kyle's eyes only. Inside, a dossier. Photos. Audio. Intimate details of Claire's supposed communications with Victor, communications that painted her not as Kyle's loyal partner, but as a Newman operative tasked with monitoring his loyalties and reporting back. It was a fabrication of exquisite precision, laced with fragments of truth that made it impossible to dismiss outright. Kyle, reeling from Audra's betrayal and Claire's sudden withdrawal, found himself teetering on the edge of paranoia. And Audra, watching through hidden surveillance, smiled. He was exactly where she needed him, alone, uncertain, and angry. In another car, the tension grew unbearable as Lily Winters stormed through the velvet-curtained hallway, her heels clashing like gunshots against the marble tile. She had arrived late to the party, her invitation delayed, perhaps intentionally, but she was here now, and she wanted answers. For months, she had heard whispers of Dumas, of operations in Europe, of manipulations back in Genoa City that made her skin crawl with familiarity. And though she didn't yet know what she was walking into, she had a gut-deep certainty that something about this figure, this ghost orchestrating chaos from the shadows, felt painfully close. As she entered the Grand Lounge, all eyes turned. Victor stiffened. Nikki whispered something under her breath. Even Billy's expression shifted with unease. Because everyone knew that Lily didn't show up unless something was about to break. And it did. The lights dimmed, the stage cleared, and for the first time since the train left the station, a spotlight beamed down onto a private dais at the center of the cabin. The guests silenced themselves, held in a collective breath. Then a voice. Not Audra's. Not Dumas' pre-recorded transmissions. But a man's voice, steady, deep, and eerily familiar. Let me reintroduce myself. The curtain parted. Gasps erupted as the man stepped forward, tall, composed, but with a face none of them recognized. Not at first. His features were different, surgically reconstructed to disguise his true identity. But there was something in his eyes, in the cadence of his voice, that ripped through the fog of disbelief. Kane, Lily whispered. Billy Flynn stood confidently under the lights, but he was not playing a character. He was the character. He was Kane Ashby, reborn, refaced, and repurposed into the persona of Aristotle Dumas. The world had thought him vanished, buried under scandal and loss. But here he was, alive and calculated, having manipulated every thread that now held Genoa City by the throat. You all chased ghosts, he said. And now the ghost is chasing you.